some people still play with dirt and call it art. The voice came from a live stream, my daughter-in-law's face glowing on thousands of screens. Behind her, my own pottery sat quietly on a shelf, blurred like an old photograph. No one looked at anymore. I didn't speak. I just watched the hearts and laughing emojis rise across the screen, while the clay on my hands began to dry. It wasn't the insult that broke me. It was realizing how silence can sound so loud. The sun over Lake Michigan rises the same way every day, slow, certain, golden. It spills through the fog and touches everything it can reach. The old porch rail, the chipped mug by the window, and the clay that waits for me on the table. My name is Margaret Ellis. I'm 68 years old, and this is the life I've built after everything else went quiet. Inside this wooden house by the lake, mornings are calm, the kettle whistles softly, and I still prefer loose tea over tea bags. The world outside hums with cars and notifications, but here, time stretches differently. Every sound seems to echo twice, once in the room, once in my chest. I live with my son, Nathan, and his wife, Kendra. Nathan used to be an engineer, the kind of man who built bridges and promised stability. He's quieter now. He tells me the company's on pause. I don't ask for details, because sometimes silence protects more than it hides. Kendra doesn't do silence. She fills the house with her voice, her camera, her lights. She's an influencer, her words, her image, her life broadcast to thousands of strangers. Content is everything, she says. Even family. Every corner of this house seems to belong to a screen. She films herself in the kitchen, in the garden, even in front of the lake. The way she talks about life, it sounds rehearsed. When she tells me to stand behind her for balance, she says I smile and do as I'm told. Balance is something I understand. I once ran a small pottery studio, Ellis Crafts, not far from here. We made vases, cups, bowls, nothing fancy, but everything honest. I closed it 3 years ago when the bills started to win. The shelves now hold memories, cups with uneven rims, teapots that never poured quite right. Nathan says we'll reopen someday. Kendra says I should sell my pieces online, if they fit the aesthetic. When I hear her say that word aesthetic, I look down at my hands. The lines, the cracks, the bits of clay under my nails. Maybe this is my aesthetic. Nathan doesn't know I've been quietly paying their mortgage. He thinks the payments just work themselves out. Kendra calls it a blessing, but not to me, only to her followers. We're so grateful for stability, she says on camera, her manicured fingers holding Nathan's hand. I watch from the hallway, wondering when gratitude became something you performed, instead of felt. Sometimes, after they go to sleep, I sit at the wheel in the garage. The room smells of damp earth and old wood. My fingers remember what my heart forgets. I press, shape, breathe, turn. The wheel hums softly like a prayer. Clay doesn't argue. It listens. It breaks. But it always lets you start again. Through the window, the lake glows silver under the moonlight. I whisper to it, as if it could answer back. I used to believe beauty was something you could hold, I say. Now I know it's something you build. When I wake up the next morning, the sunlight crawls across the floorboards, touching the half-finished vase. Kendra's voice echoes from the living room. She's filming again. Nathan's sitting quietly at the table, scrolling through job postings he'll never apply for. I pour tea into my old handmade cup. The glaze has faded, but it's still strong. I think of all the things that have lost their shine yet kept their shape: marriage, motherhood, me. Kendra steps in, her phone aimed at her face. Good morning, guys. Today's episode is all about generational harmony! She turns to me and grins. Say hi, Mom! I nod, smiling politely. My image flashes briefly on her screen, before she turns the camera back to herself. I realized then that in this house, visibility and presence are not the same thing. When she leaves, the quiet returns gentle, forgiving. I breathe it in like medicine. There's still clay under my fingernails from last night. I touch it, roll it between my fingers, and feel something familiar stir inside me. Someday soon, this quiet life will change. But for now, the lake waits, the clay waits, and I am still learning to hold on without being held. Because peace, I've learned, isn't what you find. It's what you build one breath, one bowl, one morning at a time. The invitation came in the morning, printed on glossy paper with gold letters. Mothers vs. Modern Women. A live conversation. Kendra said, it was just a fun discussion, something empowering. She smiled the way people do when they've already decided what part you'll play. I wanted to believe her. Maybe it was my chance to understand her world. Maybe it was hers to understand mine. The studio was her living room, rearranged with bright lights and too many mirrors. I sat in the corner, still holding the cup of tea I had brought from the kitchen. Nathan stood behind the camera, silent, adjusting cables he didn't need to touch. The screen lit up. Welcome back, everyone, Kendra said, her voice sweet and sharp at once. Today, we're talking about what it means to be a modern woman. We have with us my mother-in-law, Mrs. Margaret Ellis! I smiled politely. Thousands of hearts floated up on the screen. For a moment I forgot the world was watching. Then it began. Tell us, Mrs. Ellis, Kendra said. Do you ever feel laugh? Like she'd cracked a harmless joke. The other women on the panel joined in. I could hear my own heartbeat in the microphone. Outdated, it was such a small word, but it carried the weight of every silent sacrifice I'd made. I tried to answer gently. I suppose time changes all of us. But some things like patience or kindness never go out of style. There was an awkward pause. Then Kendra leaned forward. Sure, but patience doesn't pay the bills. Right? The comment section flooded with laughing emojis. I glanced at Nathan. He looked away. Kendra held up a designer bag to the camera. Maybe one day your pots will sell like this, she said. The room filled with polite laughter, the kind that cuts deeper than insults. I looked at the bag, then at my hands. Clay still clung beneath my fingernails, the proof of a life built from earth, not plastic. I said quietly, maybe one day they will, but I make things meant to last. She didn't hear me. Or maybe she chose not to. I slipped off the ring I'd made years ago, a small band of fired clay, with a gold crack running through it, mended in the old Japanese way. It was the only thing I'd ever made for myself. I placed it gently on the table. Some things, I said, aren't for sale. The comments froze. The laughter stopped. Even Kendra's smile faltered for a second, like she realized something she couldn't name. I stood, smoothed my dress, and stepped out of the frame. Behind me, her voice kept going, cheerful, rehearsed, hollowed. I didn't hear the words anymore. Outside, the lake wind met me at the door. It was cold, but honest. I took a breath and thought, so this is what it feels like to stop performing. For years, I'd believed silence was a kind of defeat. But walking away that day, I understood. Sometimes silence is the only truth left. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The house was quiet that night, too quiet. Not the peaceful kind of silence, but the kind that follows a storm, when everything that mattered has already been said, and none of it can be taken back. The ring I left on Kendra's table was still there when I came back from my walk. The lights were off, but the glow of her phone still flickered through the hallway, the replay of the live stream looping endlessly, like a wound refusing to close. Nathan sat at the kitchen counter, staring into a cup of cold coffee. He didn't say anything when I walked in. He didn't have to. His silence was heavier than any apology. I stood there for a long time, unsure which of us had disappointed the other more. Finally, I said softly, "Don't worry. You don't have to defend me. Not anymore." He looked up, his voice low. "Mom, she didn't mean it like that. It's just content." "People expect drama. Drama," I repeated, the word tasting bitter. "I lived my whole life trying to avoid drama. And now it's what we sell." He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Just don't leave tonight, okay? We'll talk tomorrow." But tomorrow was exactly what I couldn't wait for. Because in this house, silence had become a punishment. And I needed a place where silence could breathe again. So I packed quietly. One small suitcase, a few clothes, a photograph of Nathan when he was 7, and a cracked pottery bowl he made for me that year. It had broken 3 times over the decades, and each time I'd glued it back together. I never realized until now how much that bowl was the story of us. I wrapped it in a scarf and placed it on top of my things. When I turned around, Nathan was standing by the door. His face was pale, uncertain. "Where will you go?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe somewhere by the lake. Maybe nowhere at all. I just need a place where silence isn't a punishment." He didn't try to stop me. He just nodded, as if he finally understood something that words couldn't reach. The night air was cold when I stepped outside. The sky was a muted gray, the kind that hides stars but not regret. I walked slowly, the sound of gravel under my shoes the only rhythm left. At the bus stop, I waited alone. A gust of wind carried the scent of wet earth, familiar, grounding. When the bus arrived, I climbed aboard, choosing a seat by the window. Through the glass, I could see my reflection, tired eyes, hands rough with clay, but steady. For the first time in years, they weren't trembling. The city lights flickered past, blurring into streaks of gold and silver. Somewhere between the turns, I whispered to myself, "Clay remembers every hand that shaped it." And I thought of Nathan's small hands pressing into wet earth, laughing when the bowl collapsed. Of mine guiding his, steadying the edges, whispering, "That's okay, we'll try again." Maybe that's what motherhood is, not perfection, but persistence. The quiet rebuilding after every crack. As the bus rumbled forward, I rested my head against the cold glass. Behind me was a home that no longer felt like one. Ahead of me, something unknown, maybe peace, maybe loneliness. But at least it would be mine. Outside, dawn was breaking over Lake Michigan. The water shimmered faintly under the first light, like liquid silver. For a moment, I felt something warm rise inside me. Not pride, not hope, just the soft courage to begin again. And as the bus rolled along the lakeshore, I smiled, whispering to the bowl in my lap, "We're both cracked, but we're still here." The cottage by the lake was smaller than I remembered. A single room, a porch, a patch of wild grass that refused to die. It wasn't much, but it was quiet. And for the first time in a long while, quiet didn't feel like a punishment. The first morning, I opened the windows wide. The air was cold, carrying the scent of water and pine. Dust floated in the sunlight like tiny, suspended prayers. I found my old pottery wheel under a tarp, the metal rusted but still turning when I pushed it. I smiled. Things that survive long enough often just need a gentle hand. The next day, I bought a few bags of clay and a small table from a thrift shop. By evening, I had reshaped the space, a wooden bench by the window, a pot of tea on the sill, a row of half-finished vases lined up like memories learning how to stand again. At night, I listened to the lake tapping softly against the shore. The rhythm reminded me of my heartbeat, steady, slower now, but still alive. A week later, the laughter came. Not mine. There's children from the nearby orphanage had wandered by, curious about the sound of the wheel and the smell of wet earth. One of them, A girl with tangled hair asked, "Can I try?" Hesitated, then guided her small hands onto the clay. It collapsed instantly. She gasped. I laughed. It always does, the first time. Soon there were 5 of them, their voices filling the little studio, their joy spilling over the quiet I had built. They made bowls that looked like melted moons, cups that couldn't hold water, and vases that leaned like sleepy trees. But when they smiled, everything felt perfectly shaped. Sometimes I caught myself thinking maybe this is what creation really is, not making something flawless, but letting imperfection breathe. In the evenings, I'd clean the table and look at the tiny fingerprints left in the clay. I never smoothed them out. Every print was proof that something had been touched, changed, lived. One afternoon, as the light turned amber, I heard footsteps on the gravel path. When I turned, a man stood there, tall, gray-haired, carrying a small notebook stained with charcoal dust. "Margaret Ellis," he said, smiling. "It's been a long time." I blinked, then laughed softly. "Thomas Reed. I should have known I'd find you near a piece of stone or clay." He stepped closer, looking around the small studio. "You still shape clay?" Shook my head. "No, now it shapes me." He smiled in that quiet way artists do when they recognize something true. "I heard about the live stream," he said gently. "People forget that art is the only thing that remembers us kindly." We talked until the sky turned pink, about the past, our classes, the professors who doubted us, the dreams we'd buried under practicality. When he left, he placed a small chisel on my work table. "For when you decide to sculpt the silence," he said. After he was gone, I sat at the wheel again. The last rays of sunlight poured through the window, golden and forgiving. My hands moved on instinct, pressing, shaping, breathing. The clay rose slowly, trembling, alive. And in that moment, I realized, maybe silence isn't empty. Maybe it's full of answers waiting for gentle hands to listen. It had been a full year since I left that house. The lake had frozen and melted again. The children in my pottery class had grown taller. And life had settled into something gentle, the kind of peace that doesn't announce itself. It just quietly stays. One afternoon, Thomas stopped by with his usual calm smile and a folded invitation in his hand. "I thought you might want to see this," he said. I took it, the paper thick and elegant, Modern Legacy, a celebration of generational artistry. The names printed in gold: Nathan and Kendra Ellis. For a moment I just looked at it. The edges caught the sunlight, bright and sharp. No note. No message. No "we'd love to have you'd." I smiled. "It's beautiful," I said. Thomas hesitated. "They didn't invite you?" He shook my head. "No. But they didn't need to." That night I sat by the window, watching their live stream on my old tablet. The screen flickered with bright lights, elegant dresses, applause that sounded like rain on glass. Kendra stood on stage, her voice polished, her hair shining under the spotlight. Nathan beside her, smiling, rehearsed, distant. Behind them, a wall of glossy photos, family moments, home memories, every frame except one. Mind, I could have felt hurt. Maybe I should have. But instead, I felt something softer, a strange kind of understanding. Sometimes, people erase you not out of hate, but out of fear. Fear of facing the part of themselves that still needs your forgiveness. The applause grew louder. Kendra said, "This collection is dedicated to everyone who helped shape who we are." I laughed quietly. Clay remembers every hand that shaped it, whether you name them or not. I turned off the tablet, the silence wrapping around me like a warm blanket. On the table beside me, a new vase was spinning slowly on the wheel, a delicate form, imperfect, but alive. I pressed my fingers into the soft clay, steady and unhurried. The knock came just as I finished the rim. Thomas stood at the door again, holding a sketchbook this time. "You're trending again," he teased gently. "Someone at the gallery mentioned your students' pottery. They want you in our next exhibit." "Hands that remember." "Hands that remember," I repeated, letting the words linger. "That's a good name," he smiled. "It's yours if you want it." I looked at the bowl in my hands, cracked lines running through it like quiet lightning. "I think I do," I said. He stayed for tea. We talked about art and time, and the way both shape you whether you like it or not. Outside, the moonlight spilled over the lake, silver and steady. When he left, I stayed by the wheel, tracing the crack along the vase with my thumb. There was beauty there, not in what was lost, but in what remained. And as I set it down to dry, I thought of the words that had once humiliated me, outdated, irrelevant, old-fashioned. Now they just meant enduring. I smiled to myself, whispering into the still room they didn't invite me. But I was there anyway, in every hand that ever touched the clay. It was almost winter again when Nathan showed up at my door. The air smelled like cold rain and unfinished apologies. He looked thinner, older somehow, not from age, but from carrying something too heavy for too long. Mom, he said quietly. Can I come in? He nodded and stepped aside. The studio was warm, filled with the smell of clay and tea. He looked around at the shelves lined with crooked little pots the children had made. This place, he whispered. It feels like peace. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was honest. Finally, he sat down at the table, eyes fixed on the old, cracked vase sitting between us. I lost my job last year, he said, voice trembling. I didn't tell anyone. Not Kendra, not you. I just couldn't face it. He took a shaky breath. And when things got worse, I thought I could fix it by pretending I was fine. I felt my hands tighten around the mug. He went on, Mom, I wasn't fine. There were days I couldn't get out of bed. I thought if I told you, you'd see me as weak. I looked at him, really looked. The confident boy who used to build towers from mud had vanished. What sat before me was a man still learning how to stand. He said, I saw your class on the news. The kids, the pottery, you looked happy. I didn't know you could be happy without mead. His words hurt more than he knew. I placed the cracked vase in front of him and said quietly, You made this when you were 7. He smiled faintly, remembering. It broke 3 times, I continued. And each time, I glued it back together. Because I thought that's what love was, fixing what's broken. I looked at him and added, But maybe it's time to stop fixing and start creating. He stared at the vase for a long time, eyes glistening. Finally, he whispered, I don't know where to start. I reached out, touching his hand gently. You already did, I said. The clock ticked softly in the background. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows, but inside, everything felt still. He stayed for hours that evening, helping me clean the clay tools, talking about nothing and everything. At one point he said, You know, I always thought you were unbreakable. I smiled. I'm not. I just learned how to hold my cracks with grace. He laughed through his tears. I guess we're both still learning. When he left that night, he paused at the door. Mom, he said, thank you for not giving up on me. I wanted to say 1,000 things, that I'd been angry, scared, disappointed, proud, all at once, but instead I just said, go make something. Anything. Let it be yours this time. After he left, I sat alone, tracing the cracks of that old vase under the lamplight. The lines shimmered like small rivers, proof that breaking doesn't mean ending. Somewhere between love and control, there's a fragile border we all cross. And that night, for the first time, I finally learned to stop crossing it. The letter arrived on a quiet Sunday morning. No envelope, no return address. Just my name written in Nathan's careful handwriting. The moment I saw it, I knew it wasn't an apology. It was something deeper. I unfolded the paper slowly. The words were uneven, like he'd written them through pauses, maybe tears. His voice played in my mind as I read. Mom, for years, I thought strength meant never needing anyone. I wore pride like armor, and mistook your silence for judgment. But I see now, it was love all along. You used to tell me, clay only breaks if you stop touching it. I guess I stopped touching my own life, I let it dry, crack, and crumble. And still you were there, picking up every piece I dropped. When you left, I thought you abandoned me. But that was the first time you truly saved me. When you stopped saving me, I finally learned how to swim. I'm still not perfect. I still flinch at failure. But I think I finally understand what you meant. That love isn't about holding tighter. It's about standing far enough back to let someone find their balance. You were my anchor. But you also became the wind that pushed me to shore. Thank you for loving me enough to let me go. Your son Nathan. The paper trembled slightly in my hands. For a long time, I didn't cry. I just breathed. Outside, the light shifted, touching the rows of small clay pots lined on my table. Each one made by a child, each one imperfect, yet whole. I ran my fingers across the words again, tracing the indentations where his pen had pressed harder, as if he was afraid they might disappear if he didn't carve them deep enough. In that moment, I realized how long I'd been waiting, not for his success or his apology, but for his understanding. He hadn't grown late. He had grown right on time. The piano played softly in my mind, slow and tender. I placed the letter beside the cracked vase, the one he made when he was 7. And as I began shaping a new bowl on the wheel, I whispered: "Thank you, my son. You finally found your hands again." The clay spun beneath my palms, smooth and warm. Tears fell, quietly, into the spinning earth, and for the first time, they didn't feel like sorrow. They felt like released. The video started with nothing fancy. No music. No filters. Just Nathan, sitting in a quiet room with a single lamp behind him. For a moment he didn't speak. He just breathed. Then, in a soft, trembling voice, he said, "My name is Nathan Ellis, and this is the apology I should have made a long time ago." I didn't know about the video until it found me, shared by one of my students during class. They whispered, "Mrs. Ellis, is this your son?" Thumbnail showed him, eyes red, hands clasped, a man finally ready to speak. I pressed play. Nathan looked straight into the camera. For most of my life, I thought my mother's silence was weakness. I thought her kindness meant she didn't understand the world. He paused, exhaling slowly. But I was wrong. Silence isn't weakness. It's the kind of strength that doesn't need witnesses. He talked about losing his job, about depression, about pretending to be okay. And then, about me. My mom never raised her voice. She didn't need to. Every time I fell, she was there, not to lift me, but to wait until I stood again. He smiled faintly. When she walked away, I thought she gave up on me, but she was just giving me space to find myself. The comments flooded in. Thousands of strangers were listening, crying, forgiving, remembering their own mothers. He ended with words I'll never forget. Mom, if you're watching this, I love you, and I'm sorry it took me 35 years to say it out loud. The screen faded to black. For a long time, I sat still, the clay on my hands drying into quiet patterns. Later that week, the video went viral, not because of fame or pity, but because it felt real. It was a son finally understanding what love costs a mother. A few days later, Kendra appeared at my workshop. No camera this time. No perfect makeup. Her eyes were swollen, her voice unsteady. I watched it. She whispered, "I didn't know how much he was hurting." "Or how much you did." I didn't say anything. I just wiped my hands and stood beside her. "I'm sorry," she said, finally meeting my eyes. For what I said. For what I didn't see. I placed a small, cracked vase in her hands, the one Nathan had made as a boy. She looked confused. "It's broken," she said. I nodded. "Clay forgives when you warm it." Her tears fell onto the vase, glistening in the sunlight that streamed through the window. and for a brief moment, the light caught the cracks just right, forming the shape of a heart. She smiled through her tears. In that simple, fragile silence, the three of us were healed. Some people believe forgiveness is spoken, but sometimes it's molded. And that afternoon, in a room filled with clay and sunlight, forgiveness took shape. The gallery was quiet when the lights came on. Rows of sculptures, bowls and vases glowed beneath the spotlights, but the centerpiece was unmistakable, a single cracked pot, repaired with faint seams of gold and light. The sign beneath it read "Hands That Remember" by Margaret. People didn't whisper. They just stood there, watching how the light passed through the cracks, scattering into patterns across the white walls. Thomas walked up beside me, his voice soft. "Do you see that?" he said. "Perfection never moved anyone. Scars did." I smiled. For years, I had tried to hide those cracks, in clay, in family, in myself. But standing there, surrounded by strangers who found beauty in the broken, I realized every wound had been part of the art all along. Across the room, Nathan and Kendra were standing close, hands linked, eyes fixed on the vase. Nathan looked over at me, not needing words. I nodded back. That was enough. Reporters asked about the technique, the story, the meaning. But all I said was, "It's not about the clay. It's about what you choose to make of what remains." As the crowd moved on, I found a quiet corner near the window. Outside, the lake mirrored the evening sky, soft gold fading into rose. The reflection of the cracked vase shimmered across the glass, merging with the water, the light, and the horizon. Thomas joined me again, holding 2 cups of tea. "You ever think this is what healing looks like?" he asked. I laughed gently. "No, healing looks quieter than this." He tilted his head. "And how does it feel?" He looked at the children's art displayed on the far wall, small, clumsy pots with fingerprints still visible in the glaze. "It feels like starting over without forgetting what came before." The curator dimmed the lights for the evening finale. A single beam of light cut across the room, striking the vase again. This time brighter, warmer, alive. The cracks lit up like tiny rivers of sunlight, flowing into one another until they formed something whole. Someone whispered, "It looks like it's breathing." I stepped closer, watching how the gold flickered through the gaps, dancing over the surface. Maybe they were right. Maybe, after all the breaking and mending, this was what life looked like when it finally exhaled. As people began to leave, I stayed behind. The air smelled faintly of clay and pine wood, familiar, grounding. Outside, the sun had slipped behind the trees, but the water still held its reflection, glowing softly in the dusk. I pressed my hand against the glass, feeling the warmth that remained from the light. For a long time, I'd believed that art was about creating something perfect. Now I knew it was about letting the light in. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the cracks. The room had emptied, but I stayed behind. Only the echo of footsteps remained, soft and rhythmic, like a heartbeat that refused to fade. I stood in the center of the gallery, surrounded by the quiet hum of lights and the faint scent of clay. For a moment, it felt as if time itself was holding its breath. The cracked vase gleamed under the final beam of light, its golden seams glowing like veins of memory. I could hear my own voice in my head, calm and steady. They thought silence meant weakness. But silence was how women built the world. The words lingered, almost like music. I thought of all the women I had known, my mother, my grandmother, the neighbors who carried their pain without complaint. Women who worked double shifts, who stitched clothes at midnight, who raised children on faith alone. None of them had ever shouted to be heard. They built their symphonies out of patience, endurance, and quiet love. Some people mistake silence for surrender. But those who have lived long enough know. Silence is just the space before strength begins to speak. I watched a nurse walk past the exhibit, still in her scrubs, eyes heavy with exhaustion. A young mother stopped beside her, pushing a stroller. Two women who would never meet again, yet somehow, they were part of the same song. In every home, in every shift, in every kitchen and hospital room, there was a rhythm no one applauded. The rhythm of holding things together. I thought of my students, their small hands pressing clay, leaving fingerprints that would stay even after the piece dried. Maybe that's what motherhood really is, leaving traces that time cannot erase. Thomas joined me again, quiet as always. He didn't speak, he didn't have to. We both looked at the vase one last time, its light spilling gently onto the floor. "It's strange," I whispered. "I spent years trying to be heard. Now I realize I was always being listened to. Just in a different language." Outside, the night had fallen. The lake shimmered with silver light, and somewhere far away, a train horn echoed through the dark, low, steady, familiar. And in that stillness, I understood, every woman who ever kept a home, healed a wound, or forgave in silence. They weren't background music. They were the symphony itself. The world had just never learned how to listen. The morning light poured through the windows of the small pottery studio, soft and golden. Children's laughter filled the air, uneven, spontaneous, real tiny hands pressed against the clay wheel, clumsy but eager, shaping something that barely held together. I moved slowly between them, guiding each hand. "Don't rush it," I said. "The clay listens when you do." There was a rhythm to it: turn, press, breathe. For years, I had lived without that rhythm, chasing approval, mending what was already gone. But now the sound of spinning clay was enough. I looked down at my own wheel. On it was a broken pot I had almost thrown away a decade ago. Instead, I filled the cracks with gold dust and patience. Now, wildflowers bloomed inside it, yellow, white, unplanned, alive. "Why do you keep the broken ones?" one of the girls asked. Her name was Lucy. She was 7, the same age Nathan was when he made his first pot. I smiled, "Because the broken ones teach us where the light gets in." She nodded, as if she understood. Maybe she did. Children often understand what adults forget. When the class ended, I stayed behind to clean. The room was quiet again, that good kind of quiet. The kind that doesn't ache anymore. As I rinsed the tools, I caught my reflection in the window, hair silver, eyes soft, hands still steady. For a moment, I saw not an old woman, but someone nude. Someone who had learned that starting over isn't about going back. It's about moving forward with everything you've gathered along the way. Freedom isn't found in running away. It's found in shaping what remains. The clay, the cracks, the silence, the lessons. Outside, a breeze rustled the wildflowers on the windowsill. The petals trembled but didn't fall. I thought of all the women who start again after 60, after loss, after betrayal, after being told their time had passed. And I wanted to tell them this: you're not running out of time, you're stepping into it. You're not starting from nothing. You're starting from experience. And that's everything. Every hand carries a story, the tremors, the scars, the courage to keep shaping. The world may not always see it, but the clay remembers. I placed the finished vase by the window, next to the one with the flowers. Sunlight hit its cracks, lighting them up like rivers of gold. And for a brief second, it felt like the whole room was breathing again. "Every hand has a story," I whispered. "What will yours create?" The camera would fade out there, on the flowers swaying gently, on the light slipping through the cracks, on the quiet that no longer felt empty. Because some stories don't end. They just begin again, softer, stronger, and more human than before.